Hi, this is Red Robinson, and you're listening to Sid Wong.
Hey, it's Sid Wong here, and I'm here with the legendary Red Robinson, who has been incredible over the years, especially in radio, which is what we're doing right now. I want to start off with what got you into this industry.
I loved radio. When I was a kid, I used to listen to a station out of Seattle, KING, and they had at the time a thing called block programming, which meant they would have a disc jockey every 4 hours, and he would play hit parade music, not rock and roll. And I was enamored with how they did it, and I wanted to do it. And there was another man in town named Jack Cullen, and he was off the wall. I loved the way he was. He would say, let's find out what the temperature is. And he used to broadcast from Danceland, which is where the courthouse is now. But it used to be a bunch of stores in the bottom. You go upstairs, it was a dance hall. And he had a studio there. Amazingly, he would say, let's get the temperature. So he'd go up on the roof with the mic like yours, and you go, oh, it's 25 degrees or whatever it was. I loved it. It was off the wall because you got to understand something. Up until the time of the DJs, everybody was formal. Ladies and gentlemen, you know, it all changed with Arthur Godfrey, who was a disc jockey in Washington, D.C., when he said, I'm holding on to a little cup of Lipton tea here, and I've got a little bag, and I'm going to drop. And he did it all like ad lib, and that started a whole new trend, because we wanted real people, not, you know, puppets, marionettes.
What kind of kept you motivated to continue being in the radio industry for so long?
Well, when you have a passion for something, it's not work, okay? And I've always had the passion, still have it. Not as driving as it used to be, because I've been so many places and done so much over the years. There's not much more to conquer except trying to stay alive. But no, everything fell into place. A lot of things happened by coincidence. I was just talking to the man that wrote the book, The Last DJ, Robin Brunet, and I said, you know, he said, how was Brenda Lee when you and Wink Martindale inducted her into the Rockabilly Hall of Fame? I said, she's fine. I said, you know, I couldn't get over, and I remembered, because she played the Cave Theater Restaurant here many times, how diminutive she was. She was at least not quite 5 feet tall. But what a voice, what a style, unbelievable, yeah.
Growing up, who did you kind of idolize?
Disc jockey-wise, Jack Cullen I named, Gil Henry, who was at KING in Seattle, and he had a magical way about him. And people liked that. I admired Lorne Green for the depth of his voice. He was amazing. Got to meet him, too. It's amazing. Over the years, you idolize them, and you start out trying to impersonate them, and then you go, hey, no, I got to find myself. And that's what I had to do. And it's been very difficult after I found myself. So that's what I told my psychiatrist. No, I'm kidding.
Can you talk about Theme for Teens?
Yes. Theme for Teens was the show with a host called Al Jordan. And I'd listen to that in the afternoon, too. Thank you for reminding me. And Al had a half-hour show, and he took phone calls. So Jimmy Stewart, the actor, was in town on a hunting trip. People don't believe it, but, you know, Clark Gable, the cabin he had on the Coquitlam River is still there. And, you know, they preserved it. But they used to come up here hunting and fishing. And I phoned up Al Jordan, and I said, hi, Al, this is Jimmy Stewart. And he believed me. You know. The next thing, Jack Wasserman, a columnist for the Vancouver Sun, wrote, wasn't that nice of actor Jimmy Stewart to call a kid's show? I felt, what am I doing now? You know, the age I grew up in, the repercussions from pulling fast ones like that were pretty severe. And so I let 4 or 5 days go by, nothing happened. So I phoned the show again, and this time it was Peter Lorre. Peter Lorre was a character actor in horror movies. And I said, hello, Al, this is Peter Lorre. And he clicked right away. He said, did you phone in as Jimmy Stewart? And I said, yes. He said, I want you down on the show, and I want you to do guest shots with me. So I started doing that. Then I started writing a series of satirical little short plays called The Rod Gat, because rod was an expression for a gun and gat was a gun. Anyway, they were funny, and they really were. And I was pulling in 1,500 letters a week. Radio was king in those days. It's not now, but it was then. And people, didn't have as much diversity as they have now. Things to go to. I mean, even television, you see it fading a bit because you've got all the internet stuff. So it's an interesting era that we're living in right now. But in my time, radio was king.
Also, the Teen Canteen. What was that all about?
Oh, it's just that I took over Theme for Teens. Al left within 6 months and moved to Hamilton, Ontario. I took over the show, and the ratings were incredible. At one time, I had a 54% share of audience, which is unbelievable. And CKWX offered me a job. And so I went over to CKWX, and the reason I was impressed was they were about to go to 50,000 watts, which was amazing because in Canada, we only a few that had that much power. And you could hear me in the Portland, Oregon. You could hear me on the Wake Island in the Pacific. A very funny side story. When they put the thing on the air and they powered up 50,000 watts, somebody's sitting in a dentist chair in Richmond, and all of a sudden they're hearing Rock Around the Clock coming out of their bicuspid. That's true.
I was also listening to one of your demos, and you had Buddy Holly do a splitter for you?
Yes. Well, there's a picture of me with Buddy Holly up there. And we were just kids. That's what people don't understand. Most of on the wall here were very young, and there were no gatekeepers. And I think you know what I mean by that. You can't go in to see Tom Petty because the gatekeeper stops you. But in our time, we did a show with Buddy Holly, Buddy Knox, who else? Clyde McPhatter, Paul Anka, I forget, about 8 acts. And when the show was over down at the Georgia Auditorium, we all went up to the White Spot and had a hamburger. Can you imagine doing that today with Shania Twain? I don't think so. Although I wouldn't mind.
I was just going to ask you, is it true that you went to White Spot with Buddy Holly?
That's right, yeah. And he was just a down-to-earth guy. One thing I learned about all the Southern boys, Glenn Campbell, Elvis, all of them, well-mannered, polite, nice people. They were my favorite people, the Southern boys. I just thought they were great, and the ladies too, like Brenda Lee and Wanda Jackson. They're all a special breed.
It's really special how you went to MC for Elvis as well as go up on stage with the Beatles. What was that, not knowing that they were as big as they would get today?
Oh, no, they'd already been established. I mean, Beatlemania was sweeping the world. But what I didn't realize was when you looked out at the audience then, the 22,000 people were there for the Beatles. They were mostly young people, and they hadn't caught on with the college crowd yet. It was just, Bobby Soxers or whatever they called them. And then I didn't predict that they'd come back, a couple of years later with Sgt. Pepper and Revolution and all of that. That changed everything. What an amazing catalog they put out. Amazing.
What was it kind of like playing rock and roll music, being the first, and kind of knowing that it was like a risk? Was it a risk?
Of course it was. Look, to buy rhythm and blues records, you had to go to a record store, go downstairs, and they put it in a brown envelope like you were buying pornography. I'm not kidding you. And it didn't bother me. When you're young, you're full of, experimental concepts, and you go and do it anyway, and you take risks. And I would take those and go on the air and play them. People like Lloyd Price, Clyde McPhatter, Ruth Brown. And then I'd start getting the phone calls. I don't even want to say the N-word, but that's what they said. Hello, N-lover, and all that kind of stuff. It was upsetting. I'm a young guy. But, you carry on. You don't care. You have to carry on. That's it.
Do you still have any of, the first records that you played?
Yes. The first one I ever played on my own was in 1954, and it was the day after Remembrance Day. And I put on Marie with the Four Tunes. Marie was an old song, but not the way it was done by the Four Tunes. They did a doo-wop version of it, and it was upbeat. And I used to broadcast from a little studio that held 100 people across the street from where the radio station was. And at that time, it was in the Grosvenor Hotel. And all the kids from King George and other schools would come down, And it got so bad that the cops said, get back into the main control room. We can't handle this. It's true.
Talking back to the Beatles, have you ever witnessed girls go more crazy than what Beatlemania was?
Well, only once, and that was before the Beatles. Elvis was the first entertainer in history to rent stadiums. People, you got to put that in perspective. Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra, they didn't rent stadiums. They played in front of large masses of Army people, Navy, Air Force, but they didn't rent stadiums. So this was a first. So can you imagine, here I am at that time, Elvis was 22 and I was 20. I'm standing on stage in front of a sold-out crowd at Empire Stadium of 26,500 people, and you look out there and you go, oh, my God, you can't believe it. I'd never done anything like that. And yes, the crowd for Elvis was just as wild as it was for the Beatles. And Vancouver learned nothing about it or from it, and they had the same problem. They had people, where were the cops? Where were anybody? And they were just pouring across. And Brian Epstein at the Beatles thing said, when it got out of hand, Red, you're the MC. You got to get up there and tell them to stop or the Beatles are leaving. And I said, Brian, I've been around a few years and you just don't interrupt an act. He said, listen, have you ever seen a British football game? I said, no. He said, well, we've had people trampled to death, and it's not going to happen with my boys, so get up there. And then the inspector, Bud Arrington, Vancouver Police, said, yeah, get up there and do it, Red. So I did. And that was a tough thing, but it's on that recording I gave you. Yeah. It was tough. You can hear, after me, another guy came up and talked from the Beatles group. Taylor was his name. And he said, calm down. They didn't. And so finally, Paul McCartney said, you can hear him off mic. Let's play one more and get out of here. And then they ran for the limos. That was the end of it. 27-minute show. But you couldn't complain. It was $3.50 to get in.
Do you ever go back to Empire to see how it's changed?
Yes, Empire is not there anymore, nor is the field. But it was kind of an honorable thing here about 8 years ago. The Beach Boys and Bryan Adams invited me to MC that. It was sort of like deja vu all over again. Standing there and bringing them on, what a thrill it was. I've always loved the Beach Boys, and of course Bryan Adams is my favorite rocker because he's a straight-ahead rock and roll guy. No pretense, nothing. He's just straight ahead. And his manager and I have been friends for 35 years, Bruce Allen, yeah. So that was fun. That was exciting. I couldn't get over, by the way, as a sidebar, how many actors always wanted to be singers. And I think my wife got the biggest thrill, my daughter, when I took them out to meet Kevin Costner. I did an interview with Kevin. He's a gentleman of the first magnitude. But they couldn't believe it. I said, do you mind coming over and saying hello to my wife and daughter? Oh, I'd be glad to. And they were just, But you know what it is? They're human beings like everybody else. They are. You learn that after a while.
You do get to meet a bunch of wild personalities while in this industry. Can you name one of the craziest personalities you've ever met?
Jonathan Winters. I did 52 television commercials with Jonathan at the old, what then was called BCTV, which is now Global. And he was wild. And, of course, I always admired his characters. And I said, Jonathan, where'd you come up with that? He said, well, I went to work at a little radio station in Iowa. And I knew nobody was ever going to come by because the station broadcast from the transmitter, which was not uncommon in the United States. And he said, so who was going to come by on a wheat field? Sir Laurence Olivier going to come by? I said, no. So he invented all these characters. Elwood P. Suggin, Mad Frickert from Penny Springs, Iowa. I loved her. Anyway, Jonathan was amazing. And I did those commercials. I got photos up here on the wall of the two of us. I'd see him with the army outfit on, or looks like a band leader with John Philip Sousa. He was an amazing comic, but it was all ad-lib. He ad-libbed everything. And Robin Williams was the biggest fan of Jonathan Winters, yeah, and took a lot of the style. And Jonathan loved it, He's a good guy.
You were also awarded a theater of your own. How was knowing that someone dedicated a huge theater for you?
Well, you get a lot of thrills in life, and that was fun for 7.5 years, and I'll tell you why. every weekend there was another act, and I'd go out with a television camera and a microphone and interview all of them at the end or before their show. And all of that I've kept. It's amazing, the personalities, you know. I learned a lot about the English performers. What's his name? Jerry and the Pacemaker, Jerry Marsden. I said, Jerry, why are all of you, like John Lennon was the same, they all want to hear about Buddy Holly. He said, Red, he appeared on a Saturday night at the Palladium, a television show that was hosted, I forget who hosted, but it was produced by Jack Good, who did Shindig and Hullabaloo later in America. And he said, Buddy walked out, and he was wearing glasses, and I should. And I didn't know what that meant till later. He said, and I've been a fan ever since, but he came out with a Stratocaster. We'd never seen a guitar like that. I said, what? He said, no. In England at the time, if it wasn't made in England, you couldn't buy one. So I said, well, how did you end up getting them? He said, the merchant marines who came in from the United States, we'd pay them. They'd go and come back on the next boat 5 months later or 2 months and bring us a Stratocaster. I found that fascinating. It's the same story from all of them, from Jerry and the Pacemakers, Freddie and the Dreamers, Peter Noon, all of them. That was the influence of Buddy Holly to this day. Yeah.
You also chose Little Richard to open the theater with you. What was that kind of choice based upon?
Well, Little Richard was the wildest performer before anybody else. And a lot of what Prince did was the same type of thing, but not as wild. But he could sit there at the piano and play. I've got a photo of him, the two of us, in a CKWX studio, and he's there playing the piano, and I'm just listening to him. But a flamboyant guy, but unbelievable, infectious music. Things like Rip It Up, you know, I mean, you don't forget that. He wrote them. Ricardo Wayne Penniman was his real name.
You were one of the 3 Canadians to be inducted into the Rock Hall of Fame. What kind of honor was that for you?
Probably. I cried for about 10 minutes when they phoned me. No, I mean, you're in there. No, I said, you got to be kidding. They said, no, you're one of 3 Canadians. That's it. And the rest all Americans. Oh, except a couple of Brits. I'm sorry. Anyway, what an honor. And Carol and I went, my wife and I went down, and I'll never forget it because that night there was a concert to raise money for the Rock and Roll Hall because it cost a fortune. Why did it end up in Cleveland? Because that's where Alan Freed started. And it probably should have been in New York, but everything else is in New York. So I'm not against it. But they had the state put money up. The federal government put money up. The county put money up. I mean, the whole thing was going to be Cleveland. But to go that evening after all the inductions to the Cleveland Browns Stadium, you know, and there's 80,000 people there. And a local DJ, I can't think of his name, got up and said, okay, everybody, are we ready? And this was HBO. Everybody was there. He said, when I count down to, I'll go 3, 2, 1, I want you to yell, go, Johnny, go. Well, we knew then it was Chuck Berry. So we did, and out steps Chuck Berry on a revolving stage. He sang a couple of numbers. In the middle of Johnny Be Good, Bruce Springsteen came in the middle of it and played. Then the turntable turned, and out came Aretha Franklin, and then Robbie Robertson and the band. On and on from 8 o'clock till 3 in the morning. And you'd get up to go to the little washrooms on location, and I'd go, oh my God, I can't get up now. It's John Fogerty. Whatever. It was just amazing. Yeah, it was amazing. You could never buy a ticket for something like that. No.
You also helped bring a lot of rock legends for the Expo 86, especially like Roy Orbison. Yeah.
I know, it's hard to say. Roy Orbison. No, Roy came out of a special request by my former concert partner, Les Vogt. We had, brought Roy here many, many times over the years. And there was one time on Vancouver Island, we did so well with his show in Duncan and Port Alberni and over here in Vancouver that we reached in and gave him, and now it's nothing by today's standards, we gave him a $1,000 bonus. Thank you, Roy, for making us money. And we did make money, but bought less than a new house and me after all the years with Roy. So when we phoned, he said, "Oh, hi, Les, Red, I'll come up." But he was on his way back, you know what I mean, to the top of the charts. And Traveling Wilburys, everything else. He said, "I'll come up because I'll never forget, you were the only guys, the only promoters who ever gave me a bonus." So he came and played. That was amazing. Yeah. Nice man.
How have you've seen music evolve? How has Vancouver become a unique music place?
Well, I think it started out with Bruce Allen. There's no kidding. The first group he had was called Five Man Cargo. Nobody even knows who they are anymore. But he was called out because of other things he was doing to Lassiter's Den. Bill Lassiter had a nightclub. He was a BC Lions football player. And he put Five Man Cargo in there, and they took off like a rocket. And I think Bruce did it. Bruce and Sam Feldman. There's no question. They have an ear, and they had a love of the business, and they made it happen. They made it happen for Bachman Turner Overdrive, for Bryan Adams, for Anne Murray when Anne's manager died. And, today, of course, Michael Bublé. They're instinctive, and they know what they're doing. And also, I forgot Joni Mitchell and a whole bunch of other people that they had signed up. Just amazing. But I think that's where it started. And then, of course, we had Mushroom Studios with young Siegel. What was his first name? Anyway, he brought out the group from Seattle, Heart, and they put out Dreamboat Annie, which was recorded over there. And then all of a sudden, it all started to take off. Yeah, it was amazing times in Vancouver.
Can you talk about your time at Sea Isle? How was it playing like the old music that you kind of started this career for you?
You mean the oldie moldies? You know what it is? It's like photographs. Music invokes memories. And I think that's one of the great things in humankind is to have memories. And I would be playing to my audience. A lot of them had grown up with me. And so it was a great pleasure. And I take time and prepare. I've always prepared a show. You just, like Johnny Carson told me once, why do people think I just walk in and do the thing? You don't. If the show's on, start recording at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he'd be there at 9 in the morning. I mean, that's how it was. And so I always did a lot of prep. And I created, I think, interesting shows. Every hour I had short 1-minute clips from all these artists. And then I'd play one of their records. So twice an hour, that was a lot of editing time to get all the interviews down the way you wanted them. But it was, like I say, it was never work. At times you wonder, why am I doing this? It takes too much work. But it gives a better product if you put more time and effort into it.
What was kind of the transition like going from vinyl records then going to digital?
Well, one thing about digital, you can't see them. You know what I miss? Looking at a label, and it's Sun Records, and it's fascinating to look at. And they were all different. The renaissance for radio and records came in the 50s when a little guy out of New Orleans by the name of Fats Domino brought out a song. Or one from Sun Records, Carl Perkins, Elvis, Charlie Rich. And these were a whole myriad of different labels. Why was that important? Up to that point, 7 companies controlled all the music business. Decca, Columbia, Capitol. So this was a breakthrough. And it was a fantastic time because every week there was a new set of goodies. That's how I found Buddy Holly. That'll be the day. I had a little RCA cylindrical record player. I put the things on. And the ones that I caught my ear, I put aside. And so I started listing that in Cashbox as one of my favorites. And all of a sudden, a guy called Tommy Edwards in Cleveland picked it up, and then it swept the country. But I got credit for that from Buddy. So that was part of the fun of it all. This is a great record. Let's see if we can break it. But the audience was the reason it worked, because I get the audience to pick, what do you think? And they would vote on whether they liked it or not. Today they don't do that. I mean, it was market research. We didn't even know we were doing it. But they don't do that today. They say, you'll like this. Oh, thank you. What is this? Blade Runner?
There's a photo of you and Elvis over there with the teddy bear.
I got that teddy bear in the other room.
Oh, really?
I kept it, and I'll tell you a story. Elvis's fan club in Vancouver decided he'd like to have a teddy bear. So I presented it to him. I've got film footage of it. And he's looking up at it. And later on, we went down into the BC Lions dressing room where we had to wait till he went on and I went on. So there's just two of us in the dressing room. And he said, Red, you know, grown men don't collect teddy bears, okay? But he had a song out at that time called Let Me Be Your Teddy Bear. And he said, I'll tell you what, thank the fans. You take it, and, you know, I have no room to take it. And so that's what happened. I still got the bear in the other room.
Incredible. Preparing for interviews, typically you're on this side of the interview. Back then, how did you prepare for interviews not having the ease of Google?
You got to do your research. You got to do your homework. I thought I knew a lot about Kevin Costner. But when you go into their bios and look at them, there's things in there that'll twig them to give you an answer you want to hear, or something you didn't know about, but you ask the right questions, and it makes the interview more interesting, more fascinating. I used to say to all the DJs when I was a program director at CFUN, don't go and ask Johnny Cash what he thinks of our town. He doesn't know where he is. And that's true. I asked Johnny one time, how many days have you been on the road? He said 300 days in 1 year. How do you think? No wonder they went on pills and started drinking. You know, you don't. So I said, don't say, what do you think of our town, ever. They don't know where they are.
Next is one of your favorite words. What's next for Red?
That's what I want on my tombstone, next. Because nobody's got an answer for that. You know what I'm saying? Nobody's got an answer. And I think that's true. I can't believe, as somebody was doing an interview the other day, and they said, well, do you think there's a life hereafter? And he said, philosophically, he said, yes, I do, and I'll tell you why. If this is all for nothing, then why have anybody? Why be born? So there's got to be, but we just don't know the answer to it. So I believe whatever is ahead is going to be next. You know, yeah, that's just my philosophy. Stolen.
Phelan had a question. It was, if you were stuck on an island, what are the 3 last albums that you would have with yourself?
Well, I'd have to say Rubber Soul with the Beatles. I'd say I'd have to have a Bob Dylan album. And obviously Elvis, because I thought he was such a groundbreaker and such a talent. And I'll tell you why. Elvis could do R&B, pop, everything. Sinatra was a great singer, but he couldn't do all those. He couldn't. He tried, but he couldn't. And so, I mean, he was the groundbreaker. When you listen to those early rustic records of his, you realize what a talent he was. And so I'd have to have something with him, yeah, for sure.
And I want to end this interview off with, do you have any advice for dreamers?
Zoomers, quit living in the past. Yes, go and look at the photographs. Go listen to the old recordings and enjoy those moments, memory moments. But don't live there. You know, we're here today and the sun's up, so enjoy it. And I think too many fall back on, and people come up to me when I had the book signings. Red, do you remember in White Rock? And I'm going, no, I can't. Don't want to. But a lot of people are like that. They're living in the past. You can't. You move ahead.
Well, thank you so much, Red. It was amazing talking to you.
Nice talking to you.
Nice talking to you.
That's all I get, is a handshake?